I want to start with you, Senator Hinojosa, and a quick overview of the biggest concern in your district. When the storm hit today, and what do you think it'll be in a year?
Well, first of all, I guess when the Harvey came in, we were very much concerned here in Corpus Christi, Nueces County. My district runs from the western part of Hidalgo, up Brooks County, Jim Wells, then east all of Nueces County, Corpus Christi, except for San Patricia County and Port Arkansas, Port Aransas. One of the things that happens is that we were very much concerned when they predicted the hurricane would hit Corpus Christi head on, and we took every precaution necessary to protect property, protect lives, and prepare. But quite frankly, Corpus Christi, Nueces County dodged a bullet, and we got lucky in that the hurricane hit north of Nueces County, and Port Aransas and Rockport really received the brunt of the damage. Corpus Christi and Nueces County, we got a lot of wind damage. Obviously, there were some concerns about other type of damage that was caused in terms of signs and some of the infrastructure, older homes. But the reality is that compared to other areas, we were very fortunate and lucky. Our biggest problem has to do with our schools in trying to accommodate and help out our neighbors, Port Aransas and Rockport, and reaching out to provide support in terms of, not only in terms of first responders, but medicine, food, shelter, and taking in some of the students who were displaced because of the damage done to the public schools.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mr. Herrero, where do you think we are now? And kind of the same question.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, good morning, and thank you for allowing me to be here and part of the panel. Obviously, the storm did substantial damage. We took a lot of the brunt here as a wind-driven event. Obviously, a hurricane, very large Category 4, I think is what made landfall. And so when you think of damage, think of it in every aspect of that term. There's still people that have not been able to rebuild their homes, businesses that had to shut down. So the devastation is real, and it's an ongoing process, and I would guess that it would take years to come before our area is back to where it was before the storm. So there's great need. This is an area that must not be forgotten because we were the direct impact, if you will, of landfall for Hurricane Harvey. So more work still needs to be done. I think from a state's perspective, everyone that was involved did a great job in monitoring the storm, noticing that it was going to make landfall in our area, making preparations for that, where I think that and then even through the storm, everyone did a great job, all the first responders, everyone, the elected officials that have to make the decision as to whether or not to evacuate. All of that was well coordinated. Where I think that, at least where I'm learning from our perspective, is that the state was not prepared for the recovery. I think in all times, at least that I've lived here in 40 plus years, you know, we've been able to dodge a storm, if you will, not direct impact, and we've been able to say, hey, you know, evacuation really isn't an evacuation because it really doesn't really hit us. And this time, it really did hit us. And so this storm has made a lot of damage, as the senator mentioned, in the schools, the businesses, everything. Everyone's livelihood, if you will, has been changed because of this storm. And I think if we can do a better job now learning from these experiences moving forward, the state will be in a better position to be able to help our communities and individuals recover from the storm.
Mr. Lozano, how did your district go through this?
Well, it got hit by, it took a direct hit.
Right.
San Patricia County is everything north of the Harbor Bridge, essentially. And there are different phases. The first phase was the San Patricia evacuation order. That saved thousands of lives.
Right.
The morning after the hurricane, after the sun rose, is a day that forever changed my life. I had never been in a natural disaster area. I took off in my vehicle. I went straight to Ingleside on the Bay, since I had just been there recently. And these are retired communities. homes on stilts on a channel that are made of vinyl siding. And I pictured them in peril. So I went through 40 inches of water. My vehicle can take that. And I realized I was hitting power lines with my windshield. And as you got over the Harbor Bridge through Portland, the poles were bent progressively and progressively worse. It showed the power of the wind, and it was frightening. One of the homes that had a vehicle in the driveway, I pictured someone in there dying. And I didn't see ambulances. It was just hours after sunrise, you know.
Right.
But your anxiety is asking the question, where is everyone? But it takes time to deploy. Fortunately, almost everyone had evacuated and moved into the phase of that search and recovery. Literally within about 2 hours, I saw a fleet of DPS vehicles driving into Aransas Pass.
Right.
A fleet of City of Portland police officers driving in. Hours after that, there were convoys of barbecue trucks coming from the valley to cook for people. Since no one had electricity, there was no cell phone coverage. And it showed the goodwill that's deep within everyone's heart. And one of the things I've learned recently, I'm currently getting my doctorate at Vanderbilt. And we studied the response of Reuters following 9/11. Most people were just in chaos. They couldn't operate. And Reuters continued, and their plans were implemented.
Right.
But nothing is perfect. No one can ever be fully prepared for a disaster. They can have mock trials, but when it happens, nothing goes perfect. And it's important that everyone understand that, because our first responders, our state government, did everything they can. And we learned from everything, and through a feedback loop, we make, and so that's where we are right now, analyzing, establishing and implementing procedures to ensure that if we are hit again, that we'll do even better.
Yeah. Mr. Hunter, where are we now? You were in the district I guess this big piece of water right out here is all your district. You had a pretty direct hit.
I wasn't pretty direct, we were directly hit. You know, I want to thank Texas Tribune for you being here. We're trying to figure out where everybody's been since August 25th and 26th.
It was snowing.
Yeah, well, no, I want to compliment you. You're here. We've been forgotten. Let's just call it like it is, everybody. August 25th, where did Hurricane Harvey come? It was here. Everybody forgets we were hit directly. We were the first, and we were the first forgotten as far as I'm concerned. I have people living in tents.
Still.
We have people that are forgotten. They can't even figure out whether they want to stay here. I mean, 9 months, everybody, is next week. 9 months. Hurricane season starts up again June 1st. And I mean, I'm thanking the Tribune. We're the wind zone. We're not the water. All I hear about's flood. This is the wind zone. Completely different set of rules and regulations. And so I want to call it like it is. When we go on to the next legislative session, we got to talk school finance. What does that have to do with hurricanes? How do you fund a Robin Hood school that doesn't got any money, right, Port Aransas? What about health concerns? We haven't even gotten there yet, everybody. I've been to the doctor 2 or 3 times for eye abrasions. Everybody in their coastal communities, Ross. What about the people that live there 24/7? What about your insurance woes? Sometimes I wonder if there is insurance. So we've got a lot of stuff. The compliment is that you came to the wind zone. 9 months next week. And I haven't really seen a lot of focus on what happened on the area that was first hit in this state. And I mean it. I think we were the first forgotten.
What's the current state of repair here while you're on this?
Well, I'd like to know repair. I don't know about the state. I keep waiting for the repairs to come down here.
Well, I'm just as you know, you get through the emergency, right? You get through the, what?
There's different parts. So, like in Aransas Pass, one of the first things I noticed actually that morning,
Right.
at the HEB filming, I turned off my phone and I looked and said, "Where's the water tower?" There was a water tower right there, and it just, as I panned, I realized there's no water tower, and that's the only water tower for the city of Aransas Pass. Governor Abbott, when I first let them know about that, and Chancellor Sharp, within 30 seconds, I got a response back, and within 20 minutes, I was told that the city of Aransas Pass would not have to pay a penny for that water tower. They would get it from federal and state funds, and that's great for the city.
The tower's back now?
It's not up yet, but that's going to happen,
Right.
and not on the taxpayer dime for the city of Aransas Pass.
Well, that's my question. What's the state of?
Well, let me jump in.
There's different.
If you want to look at the state of repair, let's take all of us plus the Aransas County. Now, let me give you a little bit of a flavor. Rockport schools, Port Aransas schools closed. They had to ship kids to other school districts.
Right.
They put kids in portables. People don't realize this. We've lost schools, teachers, we've lost kids. We're just getting back to right now. We've got people that are asking where housing is. Heck, I kind of figure, housing, everybody, I feel like is the game, where's Waldo? I'm trying to find where the housing is along with Waldo. I don't even know where it is. So when you say state of repair,
Right.
it's a slow process. Some people, we're seeing some building. It's kind of cosmetic.
Right.
But internally, it's kind of like health. On the outside, you're looking okay. In the inside, we've got a lot of people still with a lot of pain and a lot of injury.
Mm-hmm.
And, the senator and I and Abel overlap just like JM. And people are reaching out. And I do want to say this while we do this conference. Who has shown attention? In my opinion, and what you should ask the other legislators, the governor's office. The governor's been here.
Mm-hmm.
GLO is getting beat up. It's not really them, it's FEMA. But I want to make sure John Sharp's Rebuild Texas. I see Gene here who's on the board. Those groups have been here and they've really reached out to help.
And I'd like to compliment real quick, Chairman. I sat in on a couple of meetings that Governor Abbott held with John Sharp, and one of them was in Aransas Pass. In the city hall, they put tables together, and the governor was at the head of the table, city managers, mayors, chief of police, and he was doing something that I had never seen happen, and I would assume happens in the White House in the Situation Room, where he's asking everyone what they need, and he immediately turns to his agency heads who were there as well and tells them, take care of that. Like
Right. Mm-hmm.
making the connection between the city manager and the head of the Texas Department of Health or the head of DPS or GLO, just like that. And things, it cut the bureaucracy.
And you feel like that's still going on here after
Yes.
we're out of the emergency stuff?
I do, yes, sir.
Senator, there was a number that I saw fairly early after this storm, and it was a number related to what Hurricane Ike cost. And it was that the federal government had spent $31 billion in aid, and that the state government's part of the tab was only $300 million. So the takeaway from that, early in that storm, it's a one-off, was this is going to cost a lot, but it's not going to hit the state budget particularly hard. I get the impression that's not
No,
how it is this time.
first of all, we still face many challenges. We have people who still live in hotels. People they're living in trailer homes. The money coming in from the federal government is trickling in very slowly.
Right.
It's a maze of bureaucracy that's set up. It's very confusing to local public officials and citizens trying to get help. Our challenge, we as a state have put in about $2.5 billion already, direct funding for different needs across the state agencies. Our schools are the biggest challenge for a simple reason that many schools have shut down. They will lose property value, it'll be in decline. So we're looking at about $5 billion expenditures for this
From
budget.
the state.
Correct.
Right.
Well, and we already spent about $1+ billion on public education, trying to help schools that are taking in new students to buy the proper equipment and fit in the classrooms. But if we look into the next, and this is, when hurricanes like Harvey, as probably the worst hurricane that ever hit us here in Texas, if you look at the past, Ike, Dolly, how many hurricanes have hit Texas? Yet, every time the hurricane hits, we try to reinvent how to respond to the disaster, to the hurricane, instead of having a manual that gives direction. We know what needs to be done every time we get hit by a hurricane. Right. That is really a big issue for us at the state level. I think number two, in terms of the money flowing, is coming in very slowly. I think HUD has about $5 billion to provide and help homes get repaired or replaced. But at the state level, coming into the next session of the budget, we are already looking at about a $10 billion hole, not counting.
Not a deficit, but the difference between what you need to keep doing what you're doing and what you expect to bring in.
Well, see, but
10 billion.
every session we have a supplemental budget. This last session, we delayed payment of $1.8 billion to TxDOT.
Right.
We underfunded Medicaid by $2 billion plus. We lost $400 million on the internet tax. There's another payment due to TxDOT under Proposition 1 and 7. There's almost $6.6 billion to TxDOT. So we already have about $10 billion deficit. You add the money we're spending right now as a state to help out public schools, to help out the agencies' response to the needs of the constituencies. That's already another $15 billion overall. So yeah, we do have challenges in trying to figure out how to pay for all this. The damage that's being caused by Hurricane Harvey is not something that we'll be able to repair overnight. It's going to take years to deal with the damage and get people back in their homes, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ross, the one thing that we should not forget is the fact that we still have the rainy day fund. And if Hurricane Harvey isn't the rainy day that we had, saved for, then I don't know what would be.
It's about $11 billion
It's
right now.
at least $11 billion. So when you factor in the revenue estimates, from the comptroller's office moving forward, and when you consider the rainy day fund, I'm going to be one that's going to be pushing that we draw down on the rainy day funds for the impacted areas like Rockport, Port Aransas, this community here, because one thing that we've learned, as chair of the Land and Resource Committee, we have oversight over the General Land Office, and who's now been charged with essentially the recovery efforts of the state. And when you realize that there is so much bureaucracy within levels of government, and specifically between FEMA and the GLO or the state of Texas, there's a laundry list of things that you have to do in order for that money to go from one to the actual person that's impacted. And
Right.
that's unacceptable, because you've got people that have been living for 9 months out of a home, or outside of an area that's not their home.
Outside of their
and we
houses,
got to
right.
get them back into their homes. We got to get in order to rebuild a community, you have to get the community back. And that's what's taking a long time. And so, I'm going to propose that we as a state have funds available that would be immediately provided to our communities that are impacted, like Rockport, Port Aransas, because having to wait for FEMA and the federal government to jump through all of those hoops that they require us to go through is unacceptable, and we can't wait to do that. And when you look at what rules are in place, we have to, I think, revise those, because when you had local elected officials that know where the community is in greatest of need, but cannot find the name of that person because FEMA, who's already taken their application, is prohibited from disclosing that information to the person without that person's consent. So you essentially have a person in need with someone ready to help, but without knowing exactly where to go. And that is preposterous. We have to change our system in a way that it is responsive to the needs of our community. And that goes from the top to the bottom. And I say that with all due respect, because I know that the local officials were pulling their hair because they want to get their communities back and running, but they can't get the assistance effectively and immediately in the times that they need it. And so for us, at least for me as a state legislator, we don't have oversight over FEMA. And so even when we invite them to come testify before state committees, their position is that there's a policy in place that they're not permitted to speak publicly at a state forum or public hearing.
So
that's insane.
who can blow that up for you? I mean, who do you go to say blow this up?
I think we go to the U.S. the Congress. I think we go to the presidency.
That's not a finance problem. That's not the rainy day fund,
it's
right?
not. It's a simple solution, I think. But when you have those systems in place, that's really frustrating. And I get frustrated. And I'm not in those impacted communities as Rockport and Port Aransas. I live in my home. My children attend the same schools that they've been going to.
Right.
And so we feel the frustration that they have. And we must do something immediately, because we cannot withstand another storm and go through the same process where we are now, because we will be further behind in our progress of where we need to be. And our state is much better than that.
Mr. Lozano, what's the biggest problem still in your district as a result of this storm? If, you know, one easy way to put it is if the Senator Hinojosa and the Finance Committee could write a blank check, they can't, but if they could, what would you use the first money for? What's the first problem in your district? Is it housing? Is it?
It's, I do think it's housing. I do think that there are still homes that they were in the gap. They haven't been able to get enough funding through, whether it's the insurance, that amount is still in dispute, or whether it's what they believe is required to fix their roof. Many are not coming back. Many are staying wherever they moved after the storm. And as mentioned earlier, there will be enrollment declines in our schools, and that will reduce the funding for those schools. If there were one thing that could be done much better, it's again a federal question, but it would be to allow for the rapid disbursement of funds directly to the counties or cities immediately after the storm for housing needs. It's so much quicker if they're able to go to Ron Hoover, not to plug any specific, but an RV place, and say, how many trailers do you have? We have 40. I want them all. And you immediately go put them where they need to be put. Then them sitting in Beeville to this day, because of the red tape
Unused?
required. Yes. It's just, that's ridiculous. And there was a nonprofit out of Corpus that bought 4 or 5 trailers. Within a month, they were already out being used. You know, here we are almost 9 months, and there's still some parked in Beeville. I can't comprehend that.
Let me echo the sentiments that Chairman Hunter mentioned earlier, which is the governor, in my opinion, has done a great job in making sure that the red tape, at least at the state level, is eliminated.
Right.
We had that first meeting where essentially a lot of the elected officials, mayors specifically, that have jurisdiction over those affected communities, and the debris removal, for example. I mean, these are things that people may not consider as part of their plan, but the debris removal was so large that individuals were asking the ability to waive the burn
Right, can
ban.
we burn the trees down that are blocking the driveway?
Exactly,
or whatever,
things that wouldn't be a health hazard or ecological danger, to get rid of that debris. So the governor was swift, I think, and efficient in issuing orders to state agencies, essentially either to waive this provision or to immediately approve that request. And so things like that are important. And then I think that if we use this experience moving forward, that those are other items as we come across them, to note them and take notes as we proceed. I think that we can do a better job of immediately recovering from a storm, whether it be Hurricane Harvey or anything else.
Mr. Hunter, I want to talk to you about a fight you've been in for at least 20 years that I know of regarding a thing called the Texas Windstorm Insurance Association. You want to talk about TWIA and about it's kind of government, it's kind of private sector.
I
it's-
couldn't understand, were we talking about a medical illness or were we talking about insurance on this?
Insurance. Talk about TWIA. Talk about this rebuilding problem, and we're talking about bureaucratic hurdles and problems here. It seems like that's one of them.
Let me just say this first. We have been fighting in this room right here, my coastal region, my South Texans, for 20 to 30 years. And it needs to be better. I do want to compliment, so you know, in the room is a board member of TWIA from Port Aransas. And she is one of the voices for the coastline. And so my comments are not related to her. TWIA needs to be fixed. These are people right here. They are not products. They don't need 7 adjusters. From Rockport to Port Aransas to Corpus Christi to San Patricio, Aransas, and Nueces, we have been paying for 40 years since the last hurricane. We have changed the law, senator, chairman, so we wouldn't go through speed bumps in life to get you back. So, do I think TWIA needs to be taxpayer represented? Yes. You pay.
But talk about the problem. I mean, it's been an
Well,
impediment
I'll
to
just tell you
recovery,
what
right?
the problem is. Number one, if you pay for insurance, don't you think you need to be getting fixed how long you paid? I guarantee you, you don't get 5 different people living in your house to pay your bill like you get 5 to 7 adjusters to get your house, hopefully. You also have a situation where if somebody tells you, I accept this in full, you think you're getting paid in full. No, you're not. You're getting paid what they want you to pay. We have got to get people back in their homes, Ross. TWIA can do a much better job of dealing with people that are their customers, that are their lifeline. If they're not going to be people-driven,
Right.
let's get a new system in. I can tell you that is a priority to me to go into the next session to take a look at TWIA, see how they're operating. It's my understanding, yesterday in Port Aransas, the Port Aransas City Council last evening passed a resolution asking us to look into TWIA. When things like that happen, it gives us a motivation to take a look at how we can get people. And let me give you one other comment when we talk about TWIA and insurance. You need to let us know. There's a Texas Department of Insurance.
What's that coming about?
I want to hear from everybody who's being helped or not helped, because we can't help you. Here's what I want people to remember. This is the coastline. These are coastal folks. We're in the South Texas zone. We're a mi familia area, my family area.
Right.
These folks here take care of each other. That day after the storm, they were out there. They set the example for the rest of the nation. Texans helping Texans. And it bothers me that after 40 years of paying, it's looking like it's taken 40 years to get you back to where you belong. And that's wrong. And so, yes, I think we have a problem. Yes, it can be done better. Yes, I'm going to take a lead, and I'm going to ask my other colleagues, who I'm sure will be with me.
Right.
Poor Chuy and I have never had a better hairline. We've been fighting this so long. He and I have joined the Windstorm Hair Club for Men. It's been that long fighting this. Abel has been there with us, JM. But yes, it is a concern. And I tease about it being a medical term.
Right.
But my point is, let's treat taxpayers, insurance payers, homeowners, families, kids reasonably. And I want to add one other little issue. Abel and JM and Chuy are correct. Next session, we're going to have to look at financing. We're going to have to look at school financing. But let me tell you another issue, and this impacts that insurance. Property taxes and appraisal. What are we doing sending property tax notices on sand? There used to be a home. So there's a lot of issues that will come into the next legislative session. That's why it's so important for the insurance side, the TWIA side, take care of these folks, right? Because that is their palace. And it may be from 600 feet to 3,000 square feet, but they shouldn't be prevented from getting back in.
Senator, you want to take a swing at that?
Yeah, one of the principles of insurance is that you spread the cost. And it's been a challenge trying to get West Texas up at the Panhandle to support that the whole state ought to pay for any damage that's done from a hurricane. When there's a tornado up in the Panhandle, when there is a blizzard up in the Panhandle, we help pay for those damages and help people recover. But for whatever reason, there's always this pushback. Every time we try to fix TWIA so that the cost is shared statewide and not just by the coastal communities. And we fight that every session. They have this picture of nothing but wealthy, rich people living on the coastline.
Lifestyles of the rich and famous, right?
But they don't understand we have a lot of working people that are not rich. There are people just work every day to support the family, make a living. The other part on property taxes, keep in mind that the Hurricane Harvey did a lot of damage to a lot of property. That means that the public school system will be losing our estimates at least around $5 billion in value.
$5 billion.
$5 billion, that's what the projection is. Well, we as a state got to come in and try to help make up that loss of revenue. And a lot of those schools now, their property value will decline and they won't have the tax revenue to be able to support the schools. Yeah. So it's a real challenge. We still don't know the final cost, but as we move forward, I know some communities are trying to reappraise the property. Some are not. But if you have a home destroyed, and you already got your property tax bill, you don't have a home, and yet you're going to pay high property taxes. It's a real challenge for our local public officials. For us at the state level, we're looking at the overall picture, how much money we got to set aside. And one more point on the rainy day fund. We do have close to $11 billion. My prediction is, from listening to Governor Abbott and other Lieutenant Governor Patrick, is that we will dip into the rainy day fund. We have to try to meet some of the costs that we're facing.
You think they'll unlock the key to that?
Well, we have to be in session in order to be able to access that.
But do you think that there's been a lot of resistance to spending any of that money.
I'm pretty sure that we will access the rainy day fund. We will not be able to meet our responsibilities next session to have a budget that's workable and doable unless we access the rainy day fund. And that can't be done without the legislature being in session.
Representative Herrero, if you were taking your notes from this disaster into the next legislative session and saying, okay, so we've learned a couple of things here. There's some things that the state ought to do in future disasters, whether they're hurricanes, tornadoes, whatever they are. What's on your list? What do we need to take care of that maybe nobody thought of or nobody was ready for, sufficiently ready for before this storm?
A couple of things, and we're taking notes, obviously, and some of them are not related specifically to the state's responsibilities, but and I'll take it in reverse order. So one thing I think the state should have is essentially an entity that has sole responsibility, or at least primary responsibility, for recovery efforts. The state of Texas found itself immediately after Harvey, realizing that we don't have a state entity with responsibility of ensuring the state's recovery of a disaster. And so that responsibility fell on the General Land Office. And so they were struggling to figure out, how do we implement the programs that will help people get back into their homes? How do we implement the program that will actually provide the funds from a federal HUD monies to the actual homeowner? How do we even have the employees or personnel to actually go out there? So they actually got the Texas Ag Life Extension personnel to actually work as representatives on behalf of the state with respect to hurricane disaster recovery. So there was a lot of learning lessons, if you will, not just from a policy perspective, but also from an implementation perspective. And so that one thing is for sure. When you look at the time of the hurricane, at least here in our area, there were we could have better communications during the storm. So part of what I heard from people that testified before the committee is that we knew of individuals that were in immediately affected areas, and we did not know their status because there was lack of communication. So I think better communications that will help withstand a storm or an event, and there's talk about what types of technology we can use during the storm, but then also after the fact is we knew, as was mentioned, that everything pretty much in that area of the storm was flattened. Right. Telephone poles, cellular towers, you name it. So there was no communication that existed after the fact. So when you talk about trying to get recovery efforts or response teams that were ready to move in, the question was where, right, and how many, and what's the assessment. So those are some of the things that we need. When you look at the Beaumont area, you essentially had Beaumont that was flooded in like an island. And so the question was, we've got fuel trucks ready to go, we've got water trucks ready to come in, but we never thought that the roads would be flooded. And so we had to use the National Guard, other forms of airlifting mechanisms like helicopters to actually get that water into the community. So these are logistical issues that we've come across that we're learning as we move on. So when you talk about the immediate response, there's some issues there. When you talk about the actual infrastructure that's in place, that's another issue. And then when you talk about the actual application process of individuals to be able to get that money, we have to do a better job, I think, in making sure that that process is simple and easy, and it is effective and efficiently and quick, because that money has to get from where it is to the actual impacted community. And those are issues that we're learning as we go on, that we need to make corrections to make sure that we make those changes.
Just a real quick add on. And we didn't learn from Ike and Dolly. It was
going exactly where I was going to go, right?
6 years after they happened, the people still were not getting their money for the homes. Trailer homes are still stuck someplace up in the federal bureaucracy. And we shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel. If we learn from a hurricane, we don't have a manual, at least a framework by which we approach and deal with some of the issues that come up when we're trying to get help to people that have been damaged and lost their homes and need help.
The other thing, Ross, is that when you look at Hurricane Harvey, at least in my experience, it was before Hurricane Harvey. There's an area of landfall, and the hurricane comes in, makes landfall in wherever area it does, and it works its way inland to San Antonio, to Laredo, and then it dissipates and becomes a storm. Right. This one was different. It actually hit landfall here as a hurricane, wind-driven event, caused severe damage, then essentially stalled and worked its way up along the coast. Right. So Hurricane Harvey is a unique hurricane because I think one of the category of which it came in, two, the length of time that it stayed along the coast, and then three, the length of damage that it has done to our Texas coast. The other issue that I want to point out is that when you look at the HUD formulas and how those monies are provided, and specifically to Congress and how it allocates those funds, yes, Houston is a large community. Yes, Houston has a large monetary amount of damage caused by flooding, if you will, but the proportionate effect that Hurricane Harvey did to Port Aransas and Rockport is the same, if not more.
Right.
But the amount of monies are earmarked 80% to Houston, and then the rest to everyone else. To me, that's not an effective means of making sure that communities like Rockport and Port Aransas are actually back where they need to be. And so we need to look at those formulas as well.
I'm going to sneak in another question, but before I do, there's a microphone over here and a microphone over there. And after I sneak in this question, we're going to open this up to questions from you all.
Well, Ross, to build on what Abel just said, here Tribune is doing a conference here. Texas A&M Corpus Christi is hosting University of Texas Marine Science Institute because they've had so much damage. So what I want you to note is the sharing of facilities because folks aren't able to get back into their higher education facilities. I do want to make one comment. You know, nobody here is looking for pity, and nobody is looking for a handout. But I do want to give you one symbolic resilience of South Texas and the coast. Hurricane Harvey whacked Port Aransas and Rockport right at the same time. We were first hit. But the resilience of the coastline is symbolic by Port Aransas. The liquor store got torn down in Port Aransas the morning after the storm hit. But every liquor bottle survived that liquor store. That's the resilience of South Texas and the coastline.
We've already heard about barbecue, so the essentials were.
You better believe it.
So the question I want to sneak in before they begin asking their questions is, how long is it going to be before Hurricane Harvey is no longer a public policy concern in Texas? You know, you talked, Senator, about Ike 6 years later. How long are you going to have people not back in their homes or still in some state of disarray, or school systems in some kind of, you know, readjustment because of this storm?
I think the extent of the damage is very severe, and I don't see a recovery in 2-3 years. I see this long-term recovery, maybe 6-7 years. This is the magnitude of the damage that was caused by this hurricane is enormous along the coast. And the amount of rebuilding has to be done, the amount of financing and funds that are needed, it'll take more than I would say 6-7 years, 8 years.
It'll be long-term, Ross, because until every facet of lesson learned from Harvey is actually addressed and fixed, it will always remain an issue of discussion because we cannot allow the mistakes that have happened or the lack of recovery that is existing in certain areas to continue any longer. And so I think for the reasons that I've stated before, I think Hurricane Harvey, when you look at it from a meteorological standpoint, when you look at it from an economic standpoint, when you look at it from a disaster recovery standpoint, I think that Hurricane Harvey for many, many, many years to come will be the storm to look at, to study, and to make changes as a result of.
You think it's going to take a while?
The one thing I remember is driving from Aransas Pass to the overpass where there were probably 40 cars parked on the shoulder because you could get one bar on your phone. And I was calling several people about what I felt was a lack of immediate response. And I basically posted on my Facebook also pictures because everyone was talking about other areas other than San Patricio County. And to me, that was a problem. Right. And I said, life will never be the same. And it won't. There are still parts of San Patricio County that will never be re-inhabited. There are forever going to be, where there were homes, there will never be homes there again. People know that their life is in peril based on what the damage they saw. This storm did something also that it made everyone realize how vulnerable we really are. How we could, in an hour, be blown into the Stone Age. And In 2018, that should not be the case. So one thing that this next session we have to do is find a way to get our law enforcement personnel, our first responders, satellite phones. There was no communication. There was no communication, no radio communication as well. And so if they have to call Halo Flight because someone's having a cardiac event, that could save a life. And they're inexpensive. You can buy them on Amazon. I mean, we shouldn't be at that point. Same thing with the internet. There should be satellite forums for our first responders. And there has to be a rapid deployment of Meals on Wheels and portable potties and even portable showers, because people have a right
But we
to
did a pretty good job on all of that, didn't we? I mean, generally speaking, the initial
Yes.
response was pretty strong. How long is this going to be
But not the food. That was primarily through people on their own, coming together as communities and cooking.
Yeah.
But I'm talking like within a day or two after a storm, we should be ready to be able to deploy those kinds of things immediately.
Reality, it's going to take several years, but we've given you the impact. Now, what's going to happen? These are coastal folks. This is South Texas. We're all Texans. The one thing I can guarantee you, we're going to be back. We're already back, and we're working together. Trabajando juntos hacemos las cosas. It means working together, we get things done, and we are. And the one thing I can tell you is we've had a lot of House colleagues and Senate colleagues who come down and help actually cut wood. Texas is taking care of Texas, and we're going to be back. It's going to take some time. I hope another storm doesn't come this next session, which I mean June 1st, because that could impact a lot of the law.
Right.
Time, we're in the valley right now, but we're going to hit the hill. And we're going to be back. It's going to take some time. What we're trying to let people to know is don't forget the initial areas that get hit.
You guys want to ask some questions? Come on up to one of the mics, either over here or over here.
Well, it's coming up. You know, when a hurricane hits or disaster hits, the economy gets depressed.
Right.
But then with the rebuilding, the economy moves up. And on the positive part, oil and gas prices are going up, bringing in more funding to state budget.
Yes, sir.
You keep talking about the problems with feds. I keep, and except for Todd, I want to hear you talk more about TWIA, because TWIA is a state group. It is a problem. 9 months, no payment. How many people you're talking about having to get houses taken care of? If TWIA hasn't paid, the houses are not getting rehabilitated. You have to address TWIA as a serious component of rehabilitation, this whole issue.
Is there a way to speed TWIA up, A, and B, get this set in some way? I mean, is this going to bring enough sentiment to the legislature to finally solve the problems we've had with TWIA for decades?
Right. I'm going to make a comment, but I think the other legislators here, because I know they have theirs. First, my friend who just gave you the question, let me build from it. When TWIA doesn't pay, that's costing state resources. That's why we need to get people back. And they're also, what he's being kind about, is some federal agencies are saying, we're not going to talk to you till you go get your insurance. Well, that's 9 months later. You still have to go back to get that. Yeah. The system doesn't work. It does need to be fixed. We need more taxpayer involvement on that board. That's the individual. And we also need to have more accounting. I'm sure everybody will stand up and agree, but I don't believe 95% of all your problems have been resolved. And if that's the sort of information that's being put out, I'd like to see some accounting transparency on where all this money and funding is going. I mean, That's costing taxpayers when they shouldn't have to pay. But on the TWIA, I think everybody in the room knows my position. Probably we should let the other three chime in because they'll have say-so too.
Yeah, it needs to be reformed. You know, we've gone back and forth, and we rely obviously on your assistance as a community to let us know what is working or what's not working. I know that there was some talk in the past just abolishing it completely. And so then the issue becomes, how do we incentivize the private insurance industry to provide coverage that is affordable in an area that is considered to be high risk when you look at assessments made by insurance companies. But whether you talk about TWIA or you talk about any private insurance company, I think, in my opinion, is you pay because you want to essentially have someone come and assist you in the time of need. And insurance companies, TWIA especially, everyone else for that matter, knocks on the door and is quick to receive the payment. But when it's time to pay out, you go into the issue of, well, is it a wind-driven event or is it a water-driven event? And I know that we've talked to some residents in Rockport, for example, where they said it was not a flood. It was a wind-driven event,
Right.
but it caused water damage. And so you have insurance companies that do this, you know, it's not a wind-driven event, it's a flood event. No, it's not a flood event, it's a wind. So at the end of the day, no one pays out, and the individual that has been paying on those premiums, maybe in some cases to both, doesn't get a payment at all to cover the damages. And so we have to have reforms. And I know that we've done some things that are good. There's some things that I still think that we need to do that could be much better in moving forward to make the insurance process more consumer friendly.
Got time for another question if somebody's got one, or we can just keep going on this. What's going to speed TWIA up? I mean, you know, we're 9 months out. People are waiting to get out of hotel rooms. You know, what speeds this up? Answer quickly, and then we'll get to your question.
Well, I think that this last storm, TWIA, for the first storm, in their response, they had far more resources available. I mean, they set up, and I speak for my county, San Patricio County, they set up in parking lots, tents for claims processing, and their outreach was pretty significant. And from that, we did get calls into our San Patricio County office from some homeowners that had disputes on the amount, and we were able to resolve most of those with
So you've
TWIA
had relatively good experience.
in San Patricio County. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
okay. Yes, sir.
Good morning. Let me first start by saying Texans are proud, extremely proud. So in regards to mental health, what programs or how are we attacking that problem as far as behavioral issues, not only for children, but for adults, for couples, for families as well?
From what I
Mental
understand,
health, public health issues.
the TA commissioner pretty quickly afterwards mobilized resources to help our school districts hire more people to deal with children's psychological impacts from being relocated.
Right.
In terms of the adult population, I honestly don't know exactly what state resources were provided. I know that our local hospitals and charities were there and opened their doors as people had issues. But I think the outreach for the adult population, since it's not a captive population like kids going to class, there has to be someone actually going out and asking people, because depression is a very undiagnosed problem in society as we see it already. People aren't generally going to go get help. They think it's just a horrible event, I'm sad. No, I mean, there's some
Let me jump in
medical
and-
response
and
that must
add
be
with,
had.
to the question and to Reverend Chairman Lozano.
Sure.
Let me give you all an example. It's a great question. And it's going to be on the legislative issues that we're going to have to deal. The real answer from my standpoint is I don't think we're prepared yet on the mental health. Everybody, you were hit by Category 4. Just remember, there's only one other level, Category 5. You were hit by Category 4. Some got more bullets than others. Let me give you a real-life example on what we're going to deal with. And I think it's great you brought that up. I forgot to say it. I was talking to one of the superintendents in one of the affected areas. This was in October. Storm hit August, October. I'm over at the school. It's raining. The streets are flooding a little bit. And it had flooded the night before. The superintendent says to me, Todd, next session, I want you and the legislature to take up children's mental health. And I go, what do you mean? He said, Todd, before Harvey, children in this school had clothes and toys. He said, Harvey hit, they lost everything. He said, but Texas and Texans, right after the storm, gave those kids their toys and their clothes back. I said, okay. And he said, you see that water and that flooding going out there right now? I said, yeah. He said, all morning long, the elementary school kids have been running to their teachers saying, can we go home? Can we go home? Because they heard the water. They wanted to go put those toys and clothes on their bed and their dressers. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's a trauma that you don't feel unless you're in it. We're strong, but we're going to have effects. Thank you for asking, but it's a goal we're going to have to handle.
I'm going to have to call it right there. We'll get a 15-minute break here.
Ross.
Session on, we're out of time. We've got a session on saving the coastline, one on taxes, one on schools, and a conversation with John Sharp, who's been heading the recovery efforts. I want to thank Senator Chuy Hinojosa, Representative Abel Herrero, J.M. Lozano, Todd Hunter. Thank you very much. We'll be back in about 15 minutes.
Good job.